folks, I'm Tori. Welcome to Bass Strategy. Today we are going back to the basics and we're going to talk about what kind of a predator a bass is. Now there are 4 different kinds of feeding strategies that a fish can use to capture their prey. And a bass is a generalist feeder, meaning it uses all 4 of the different feeding strategies. Think about this. In almost any lake or body of water in the United States, you're most likely to be able to find a bass in that lake. And that's because they're able to use any one of these feeding strategies because they are such versatile hunters. So we're going to talk about each one of these feeding strategies. We're going to talk about what they are and how a bass uses those feeding strategies to capture their prey. So let's get right into the first one, and that is the rundown approach. So when you think of the rundown approach, you need to think about open water schooling fish. Fish using this strategy are going to capture their prey with huge bursts of speed, and they're also going to be willing to follow and stalk their prey over a long distance. So when I think about the rundown strategy, I think about trout, salmon, if you're an ocean fisherman, tuna. All of those fish use the rundown strategies. They are built for speed and fishing and hunting in that open water for schooling fish. So a bass also uses this strategy. Think about all the times you throw spinner baits, A-rigs, anytime you're looking to mimic a small school of bait fish, you're going after a bass and trying to entice them to bite using the rundown feeding strategy. It's a very active way to catch fish and a very active way to hunt. The next strategy is a stalking strategy. So when you think of stalking, think about when the fish follows its prey and then all of a sudden uses a huge burst of speed to overtake them. So when you think of that, think about pickerel, muskie, any kind of those fish that'll follow that prey and then use a quick burst of speed to capture them. And if they miss that opportunity, they're very likely to just give up and swim away and look for the next opportunity. And this is probably the most common technique that the bass uses when they're actively feeding. Think about all the different kind of lures that you're throwing to go after this bass. We're talking top water, glide bait, bladed jigs, swim jigs, lipless crankbaits, any of those quick moving reaction techniques. You're going after the bass that's stalking their prey the majority of the time. So the next technique we're going to talk about is habituation. So habituation, a fish is just sitting within its prey, not giving off any of its hunting signals, and when the prey gets a little bit too comfortable and they're in a position of weakness, the fish goes and strikes with a quick burst of speed and overtakes that prey. So think about all the times you've been at the lake and maybe you've seen in the water all the bait fish around, some sunfish around, and there's also just a bass sitting there, almost like the bait fish don't even know it's there. And you're thinking, why isn't this bass feeding? Why isn't it going after all of this easy food? Well, when a bass or any kind of fish is hunting, they're giving off signals, specific signals that other fish are really aware of that they are feeding. And when they're in this habituation technique, they're not giving off those signals. They're almost sitting there completely inactive. Now, I think about catfish when I think about habituation. There are catfish. I used to keep a catfish in one of my fish tanks, and I would put bait in the tank, guppies and goldfish, and all the other fish in the tank would go crazy after these bait fish, but then the catfish would just sit there. And when a goldfish or guppy got down to its level and just forgot, didn't even know it was there almost, the catfish would come alive, it would come up, look at it, and crush it with a quick burst of speed. And how many times have we seen bass do that same thing to maybe a crayfish? You see the bass just sit there, and then the crayfish is crawling around, and then all of a sudden it knows it's in trouble, the bass comes up and overtakes that crayfish. Habituation is a great technique for a lot of lures like jigs, worms. Stop and go retrieves is another great technique for going after bass using habituation. And most of the time when a bass isn't actively feeding, they're more in that neutral phase of feeding, they're probably using habituation as a feeding strategy. The last feeding technique that fish use are ambush. So we all know what an ambush predator is. They're relying on their cover and what's around them to hide. They're relying on camouflage and being able to move in and out of cover in order to stun their prey, sneak up on them, and capture them. And a lot of times when people think about bass, they think, wow, that bass is an ambush predator. Look at how camouflaged it is. It's perfect. It hides in all the cover. It's a perfect ambush predator. In all reality, if a bass was only an ambush predator, it just simply wouldn't get enough food to sustain itself and grow into a big fish. When we're fishing for bass using the ambush feeding strategy, those are some of the most inactive bass that we can catch. We're flipping into heavy cover or jigs. We're really slowing down and trying to entice those fish into feeding. Not that those bass aren't feeding, but when you think about how many casts you have to take when you're going after the ambush predator, it's a lot. You have to make a lot of casts, and you're really dealing with a small strike zone, a small window. So a bass, if they're going to get enough calories, if they're going to get enough food to get big, they're going to have to be a little bit more aggressive than being an ambush predator and a habituation predator. Although they use both, those are some of the most passive ways that they hunt. And the majority of the time, if they're going to be active, they're going to be using stalking or running down their food. So hopefully this video helps you think about bass and how they feed in their world. They are generalist feeders. They use all 4 different kind of feeding techniques to capture their prey. And think about that next time you are tying on a lure. If you like this video, give me that like and consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.